the first time you've done almost anything in life, it was probably shit. And that's okay. AI is no different. We need to learn how to do it. I'll think back to the first time I asked a girl out on a date. I did a really rotten job of it because I didn't have any experience doing it.
And now?
I got better. The first time I drove a vehicle, first time I tried to ride a bike, I did a rotten job in each of those cases. And it's not so much on you, but part of it is because it's how we're asking the AI to do things for us that does matter. I think that where we fall apart is if we're having a conversation between you and I, it's pretty simple. If you're an expert at writing press releases and I need a press release written, I'm going to come up to you and I'm not just going to say, write me a press release and turn around and walk away. But that is what we tend to do with AI. We tend to walk up and say, create a social media post, write me an email, make a memo, create an SOP, and we don't give it any context. And then it produces something that's really pretty rotten overall. And we're like, see, I knew it. This AI stuff just sucks. When in reality, we simply didn't give it a chance to succeed any more than I would give you a chance to succeed if I just said, write me a press release and I turned around and didn't give you any more information.
Which I think leads us perfectly to talk about what is the basic structure and some of the things to think about to write the perfect prompt. So, okay, write me a press release is not a good prompt. So what would a good prompt look like?
Well, I believe in taking 4 steps and following a 4-step framework. We call it the perfect prompt framework in order to do that. And it's very straightforward and simple. Step 1, tell the AI the type of expert that it is. Number 2, give it context. Like anything else in life, we need context in order to be able to do a good job. And then step 3, ask it our question. That's what most of us do. We stop right there. We literally just ask it our question and we stop at that point in time. Step 4 to me is the most important. So we've told it what type of expert, we've given it context and we've asked our question. But chances are, if you're anything like me, I don't necessarily know all of the information that I should give it in order to get the right response. It's like if I asked you to write a press release, I don't really know what information you need because I'm not an expert at that. So I need to let you ask me questions, and we need to end it with step 4, just literally adding this phrase to the end of your prompt, which is ask me any questions you have. And when we do that, you're giving permission to the model to now not follow its programming, which is to fill in the blanks and assume, but to ask you questions, because the model's smart enough to know, you asked me to write a press release, I need these 5 pieces of information, and you only gave me 2, Jonathan, so it'll ask me the other 3. And that will allow me to answer and give it a much, much better response.
So let's maybe actually go through those 4 steps, each in a little bit of more detail. So the first step is to tell them what sort of expert they are. Why is this important? And what might that look like?
We have to understand that AI has been trained essentially on every book in every library around the world on all kinds of additional data. And much like if you could imagine walking into the world's largest library that was hundreds of stories tall and literally bigger than any IKEA store you've ever been in your life. You need to find one book. You need a map or you're going to be there for years trying to find that one book. And AI, while it's much faster than we'd be at finding a book, has so much information that when we direct it and tell it what type of expert it's supposed to be, it immediately can go zero in on the book or the books or the knowledge that we need it to access. And that allows it to give us a more refined and a more specific response.
So a large language model, in a sense, contains multitudes. And this definitely comes back to this theory of mind. Like, one of the things that you see is that as a person interacting with an AI, you assume it is like a person. And in a lot of ways it is, right? Because it is designed to simulate the way a person reasons. But a single large language model is not just a particular person, or it's not simulating a particular person. It's nearly like a whole lot of different people. It's got multiple personalities, multiple sets of expertise in there. And so if you just talk to the LLM without telling it what it is, you kind of get an averaged out generic version of that person.
Yes.
But accessible in there, you're saying, okay, when you say you are an expert at public relations, you are telling it which of the people inside it you want to talk to, in a sense.
Exactly.
And
I love that.
That activates different parts of the neural network and gives you specific results that you want.
No, I love the way you put that. I think that's so accurate. You're basically telling which of your multiple personalities do I want to speak with at this point? And it works so incredibly well.
The next thing is context, which is simultaneously, I think, the most obvious part of this, Jonathan, and also the thing that people seem to fail at the most. Tell me about that, and what does it look like to give an AI good context as part of the prompt?
Well, this is the area where I think most people tend to overcomplicate their prompts. Give it the information that you know you should and that you feel that you should, but don't worry about giving it everything. In other words, this is not a time for you to stress and worry that, oh, I'm not sure what information to give it. Because of step 4, we want to give it everything we can to help set the context and help set the parameters, but we've got a fail safe. So you just want to give it what you believe you know that would be applicable. Just like if I was asking you to write a press release, I might say, hey, it's for this audience and I want it to achieve the following. There's probably 6 more things you need to know, but at least that gives you some context to draw in to what I'm looking for. And so I think that's really the important part of context.
Yeah, well, I guess there's 2 types of context, right? There's sort of the broad context, the true context, which is like, this is the type of company we are, this is our tone of voice, this is the industry landscape, and so on. And then there's the narrow context, you could nearly call it the text, right? Which is like, if you wanted to write a press release about a certain thing, communicating a certain message, you better tell it what that message is. A mistake that I've made quite often is said, write me a LinkedIn post on this topic or whatever. Not that I use AI to draft any of my LinkedIn posts, folks, but I've asked it to do that because I have an opinion on that topic, right? But I haven't told it my opinion. So
Thank you.
It can't guess, right? It can't guess what you want it to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. We, like you said, we asked it to do something for us, but we didn't tell it what we wanted the outcome to be or the position that we wanted it to take. And therefore, it may or may not know and may totally miss the mark. So I find that a lot when I'm doing it. And I readily admit I do use AI to help with my social posts. I've still got the idea. I'm still doing the final refinement, but I use it to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And if we don't tell it the position we want it to take, the tone that we want, it's not going to likely guess that and get it right.
And neither would a person. So this is one where an LLM is a lot like a human, right? And this to me is nearly like a leadership or a communication skill that is very similar between working with other people and working with AI. If you've got an intern or a junior employee and you say, go write me a press release, they'll also not do a good job, right? Because you haven't told them what to do. You haven't given them adequate guidance. So nearly, maybe, Jonathan, I'm sorry to sort of break your framework a little bit, but I think when you talk about context, there's 2 types of context here, right? There is true context, and maybe you could call it guidance, right? Like, what do I actually want you to do? And I think that's really important.
I don't really consider that breaking the framework. Part of the framework is designed to help make AI approachable. And so obviously there's a lot of add-ons that we can put into that framework to make it even better. But my goal there was to come up with something that was simple and applicable for the average person that wasn't overwhelming. Somebody in my group recently posted a 27-step prompt framework.
Oh, God, no.
And it's a better prompt framework than I did. But the problem is it's 27 steps. And therefore, the average human being is going to look at that and go, oh, never mind, that's more work. I wanted something that was very approachable and very effective. That got us 90% of the way there in 4 simple steps.
Well, another thing, and maybe we can come back to this, Jonathan, is that there are different levels of prompting for different use cases, right? I think there's sort of the interactive use case and the stored use case, because, if you're building a piece of software that uses AI, or, if you want to provide some instructions to a system, then maybe a 27-step prompt framework. I've done this, right? I've put a lot of effort into crafting a prompt that will be used over and over again. But when I'm in an interactive session, I have a ChatGPT window open, I'm not doing a 27-step prompt. That's overwhelming. And so all of these things actually kind of dovetail together in interesting ways. And perhaps we can come back to that. Step 3, the question. So what does that look like?
It's the simple part. It's whatever you were going to ask AI in the first place. It's the write me the press release, create the SOP. Often it's 3 to 5 words. It's whatever it was that we were going to ask it to do in the first place.
And then step 4 is encourage it to ask you questions to fill in the information gaps it has from the initial prompt. Now, why is this so important, and why is it necessary?
Well, the main reasons it's necessary is that AI has been programmed to not ask questions, but to make assumptions.
Why is that, do you think?
I think it's very simple economics. They want us to use the AI model, and they know that as human beings, if they frustrate us and they ask us to do too many things, we're not going to use it. So they have to make it as easy as possible. It's kind of like if you've ever had a 3-year-old in your house. They walk around and the constant question they have for everything is, why? Why? After a while, we just, and I please not hear why. when I say to do something.
I'm going for a walk.
Yeah, exactly. And so they've trained the AI to fill in the blanks, to ask assumptions. I believe because they're desirous of us to use it more and they want to make it less annoying. The reality for many business people, at least, is the fact that by doing that, they've actually made it more annoying in some respects because it just misses the mark totally in some aspects. So that's why I think it's so important that we tell it, ask me any questions you have, and we give it that permission to do so.
I've been doing this for a little while now, and the results are amazing. And I think you're right that people, it's more annoying, but it's even worse than that. I was talking about the cynics or the skeptics who say, oh, well, I tried using an LLM and it's shit. Or they'll point to these articles about hallucinations, which is where the LLM makes up facts, which is something that is, in a sense, innate to the technology. It doesn't know how to say, I don't know. So if you don't give it all the information, then it is more likely to hallucinate. Whereas what it does seem to be quite capable of is if it doesn't know and you give it permission to ask you questions, then it is actually much less likely to hallucinate. That's what I've noticed, right? Because it gets to ask and it's shockingly good at it. This is why it feels like we're in a bit of an age of wonders. People tend to underestimate these large language models more than they overestimate them. And the ability for you to give it a prompt and for it to look at that and say, okay, here are the gaps that you need to fill so that I can produce a good result. Better than most humans can do it, right? It'll come back with really targeted questions. I can answer them and I feel a lot more confident with the result after that. So folks, yes, I don't know. Oh, maybe, you said, Jonathan, maybe why they're not programmed to do this out of the box, but it is such an easy and important, if you call it a hack, it's not a hack, right? It's a core part of the technique. Always encourage it to ask you a question. And again, as someone who has managed teams of people, led teams of people for a long time, that's always been my approach as a leader, right? If you have a bunch of junior employees who are perhaps, not super confident and you give them an instruction, then they'll go off and do it wrong. But if you say, hey, look, I really want to be accessible. If you have any questions, my expectation of you is that you ask them to me so that you don't make mistakes. And it's the same with the LLM. Think about the LLM as, maybe this is not the most politically correct thing to say, but that it's your servant, right? You have a lot of power over it. It doesn't feel empowered to challenge you unless you explicitly give it permission. That is how it's programmed.
No, I actually think that's a really good analogy. And, you're absolutely right. It doesn't feel like it's empowered to do that because of the way it's been programmed. And we can do that. And it then ultimately saves us a lot of time and energy because we're getting better responses out of it.